Hi everyone, and welcome to Carmel Unfiltered. I'm Samantha Fulling. This episode is a recap of the February 24th, 2026 board meeting, breaking down what was discussed, what decisions were made, and the community's take. Why am I doing this? Board meetings can be so long, so confusing, and sometimes downright boring. There were nights I stuck it out for the long haul, and others I just could not sit there for another minute. However, board meetings are important. They provide insight to the inner workings of our district, give you an idea of current fears and complaints, and allow you to decide if you'll vote for that trustee next time they run. So this is my way of giving back to the district stakeholders who can't be present during meetings, don't want to review the next day, or for those who are really only interested in one or two hot topics of the night. I will state approximate timestamps for each section or topic I run through, so if you're interested in looking at the actual board meeting, you'll be able to find your topic of interest a little bit easier. I just want to be clear that I am referencing to the YouTube transcript timestamps. Sometimes they are a little bit different from what shows on the video itself, so just keep that in mind. I will also be linking the meeting down below for your convenience, but you can easily find current board meetings on YouTube by searching Carmel CCSD Board of Education. Let's get into it. So tonight was an extremely long meeting. It was almost 5 hours, and admittedly, I struggled with paying attention while rewatching this yesterday. This is Thursday the 26th now, so it's been 2 days since the meeting. And I am relying a lot on captions and transcripts and the agenda, just due to my own time constraints. So if I do miss something, or if I misspeak or get something incorrect, please reach out to me directly or leave a comment and I will correct it. So the meeting starts at the 7-minute 20 mark on the YouTube video. They do call to order and roll call. Present were Vice President Curzio, Trustee Douglas, Trustee Grasso, Trustee Magliano, Trustee Torpy, and Trustee Wise. And then they immediately recessed into executive session to discuss employment history of a particular person or persons. They returned at the 1 hour, 3-minute mark where the Pledge of Allegiance was done. The national anthem was performed by 2 high school students in the wind ensemble. Shout out to those 2 ladies, very good. The 1 hour, 7-minute mark begins new and goods. It begins with the recap of the February 14th community forum about the Transportation Capital Reserve proposal. About 30 attendees toward the bus lot. The district did send out an 8-minute video synopsis afterwards, which I'll make a mental note to link that down below as well. There is a 70-person survey response. Survey highlights concluded that 75% say the project is important and 72% are likely to vote yes. Common concerns are the electric bus implications, infrastructure priorities, and timeline. Most common theme and comments was that it was long overdue, and project stage framing is sharing the vision. The next step is architectures and studies, and then the design phase. So at the 1 hour, 11-minute mark, the board commented on the superintendent's new and good. They praised the superintendents, some saying that they saw the video, it was well done, and explained everything very well. They mentioned KES pickup traffic and desire to move buses down. Vice President Curzio emphasized that this is a very different project than the previous bus garage debacle from, 4 or 5 years ago now. And this is not a building or garage or land purchase project, that it is primarily paving and site work, fencing, and buffer landscaping. And notes prior voter rejections to the previous project as December 2017, October 2018, and March 2019. Curzio questions Ken Silver about the land sale near the Kent complex. Ken Silver mentions that there is one approval left, and the benefit reduces expenses until 2037 and brings a $300,000 cash at closing surplus. At the 1 hour, 16-minute, 30-second mark, there was a discussion. The committee wanted a breakdown before approving the arch fee. Ken Silver explains reserve fund mechanics, that it was established in 2015. It has a current balance stated at about $3.2 million. It is only for capital projects, can't be used for staffing, operational items such as teachers, field trips, etc. And the reserve can't be replenished anymore, only interest. At the 1 hour, 21 minute, 40-second mark begins first public comment. So the first public commenter was from Stormville. He challenged the timeline and credibility of the former superintendent resignation date. He says the resignation was a walk-on item on April 22nd, and the president appeared emotional. He argues the board couldn't have known a month prior, and references the New York State SBA ethics. He also brought up legal billing and retainer hours and said he hasn't been answered. That was from an email that he had sent, and mentions the budget. $200,000 retainer includes 1,100 hours and then hourly billed. He brought up the office staff summer hours MOA and claims they were paid for more hours than they actually worked, and mentions the UPK shortfall, notes agenda wording change, says shortfall didn't appear, states he believes approximately $230,000 shortfall, and frames it as community paying for neighbors' preschool. There was an immediate board response to the first public commenter. So just to go in order, I'm going to state that now. That starts at the 1 hour, 28 minute, 15-second mark. Trustee Wise responds to the first public commenter, speaking as an audit committee member. He says the UPK issue wasn't a grant running out. Says the decision was made by personnel no longer in the district, and that UPK will be fully covered going forward, and mentions meeting with Senator Pete Harcum later on, and that he cannot speak to on the matter of the previous superintendent's resignation, as it is an exec issue. The superintendent then responds to the summer hours MOA at the 1 hour, 31 minute mark, and says these summer hour provisions have existed since the 2001-2002 fiscal year, and the district is working to change contracts over time via bargaining, and says the new MOA moves the unit to a 5-day week, but still differential to summer hour norms, and notes similar provisions in neighboring districts. At the 1 hour, 33 minute, 25-second mark, the second public commenter comes up. She attended the February 14th bus lot tour and confirms its poor conditions. She praised Mr. Silver and Mr. Plotkin for their presentation, and frames the project as safety for staff and kids, and encourages support in the May vote. The third public commenter started at the 1 hour, 35 minute, 30-second mark. She spoke about special education, parents with high school students transitioning to adulthood, argues that potential downstream impacts foreign language requirements, testing stressors, district costs, IEP amendments, and curriculum and budget uncertainties, refers to an email about remote learning and says that accommodations and modifications need to be considered during the remote model, and mentions attendance and that students with disabilities cannot be marked absent if the inability to attend is a manifestation of their disability. At the 1 hour, 42 minute, 30-second mark begins the superintendent report. He thanks the third public commenter for her email and calls it a segue, and notes that this is the first time that the district went fully remote that day on Tuesday the 24th. Acknowledges that there is work to do and improvement, especially for vulnerable students. Mr. Plotkin said that the fourth snow day used anticipates an in-person day added May 22nd, which is a Friday, and addresses the social media conversation about the snow day waiver, and says that the waiver is only honored if it expires every other day. I'm not really sure what that means, but I do know that there was more detail. I just did not get a chance to thoroughly go through this section of the meeting, so I do apologize. That is on me. But please go back and listen to what Mr. Plotkin said. And if there is any clarification needed, I can reach out or you can reach out to him directly. He mentions that the waiver was previously filled out after the high school bomb threat, and says that county and BOCE superintendents are working with Albany for clarity. He frames remote learning as a stopgap but not preferred, and adds remote builds functional life skills, i.e., virtual component in a lot of work settings now. And he praised the buildings and groundskeepers, stating that they slept in buildings and worked overnight with 5-hour naps here and there to get the buses dug out and our walkways and parking lots done. And then he also brought up that there's a possible overnight storm next week, so yay for that. And it was acknowledged that board comment was jumped over and that nobody had anything to add. So they kind of did one public comment, board comment, last two public comments, but then nobody had anything additional to add after public comment was officially done. So they just jumped right into the superintendent's report. So at the 1 hour, 48 minute, 42 second mark begins the presentation with Ken Silver. I'm going to be honest, I do not have the brain for budgets and money. I'm probably going to misspeak here. I am still learning, and this is a very complicated topic for me. Please bear with me, please. And again, if anything is incorrect, reach out to me directly, and I will be more than happy to clarify or correct anything. So the budget advisory committee meetings may start running on Saturday mornings if that works better for scheduling. Ken Silver mentions that the 5 pillars of the district: student needs, access and equity, safe operations, long-range planning, and community trust, and that the upcoming budget includes instruction, technology, facilities, maintenance, transportation, athletics, extracurriculars, and notes this is the 20th version. He began in October. He walks through the process: obligations and debt, principals requests, defense rounds, special ed reviews, department meetings, BOCES, IT, state aid run, and revenue estimates, and describes the next steps as outreach meetings with town boards, rotaries, chambers, PTO, PTA, and seniors, and notes that the board determined no tax increase next year and warns that there may be a tax cap effect the following year, and will publish contingency budget scenarios if budget is defeated. The state aid highlights he brought up were foundation aid up to 1.7%. Again, mentions the UPK line shown as $10,000 per child, and claims that there is no lottery limit. At the 2 hour even mark, electric buses are brought up. And the key points that were brought up during that was that this district has zero infrastructure for electric buses. Ken Silver was quoted saying the electric bus study anticipates $44 million to taxpayers. Moving on to budget revenue and reserves, investment income is now projected at $1.8 million versus $175,000 2 years ago. Bond premiums are used to offset future costs. Here's a breakdown of restricted reserves. Employee benefit reserve is $6.4 million, using $900,000 next year. There is an unrestricted fund balance capped legally at $5.9 million, and none has been used. And Ken Silver states this is not sustainable year after year. Ken continues on saying that he added new line codes for workbooks, copy paper, field trips, assemblies, and tech supplies. And the purpose of that was to track spending by category, improve transparency, and prevent hidden lump totals. At the 2 hour, 15 minute, 15 second mark, Trustee Wise jumped in with some budget questions. He asked for a transparency request of an Excel version of the budget, wants percentage increases shown, wants subtotals by category, and wants clearer personnel cost breakdowns. Silver did agree to much of that. Trustee Wise also brought up that the Kent Elementary field trip budget is about $49 per student, and other elementary schools are $23 per student, and that George Fisher Middle School field trip funding was cut, as well as the Carmel High School field trip funding. And Wise was quoted saying, based on where you live, you may or may not get field trips, and that is not acceptable. and the board agreed that this was an equity issue. At the 2-hour 41-minute mark, Wise continues to warn that salaries increasing roughly the same amount as reserves being used, and reserves won't last forever, and the community is already overtaxed, especially the elderly residents on fixed incomes. Silver does admit uncertainty and calls the budget that he was presenting the other night a working draft. And although there was some concerns, generally speaking, the board praised Ken Silver's budget transparency, talking about correct coding, community outreach, the budget advisory committee, and the town board presentations. And there was a strong support for a 0% tax levy to kind of correct the historical overtaxation in this district. At the 3-hour, 13-minute, 15-second mark, compliments and complaints were read. Well, not read, but, spoken about. There was compliments for middle school staff, complaints about snow days. At the 3-hour, 15-minute, 30-second mark, there was a debate on why meetings are so long. So Trustee Torpy did bring this up. This was his talking point, basically just trying to figure out how to use board time more effectively and cut down on time. I can't say I disagree with him considering how long this meeting was, but here is a little bit of the back and forth. So Trustee Douglas disagreed with board members having a back and forth conversation during public comment responses. Trustee Torpy asked if reading motions aloud could not be done as it is not required and it is time consuming. Trustee Magliano asked if we could replace the compliments and complaints section of the agenda with more of a Q&A. And I know he didn't get a full chance to explain this, but this is what I understood him saying, that questions asked on the February 24th meeting could then be answered on the next meeting, and so on and so forth. That way it's answered publicly rather than just an email to the person who asked. I don't think that is a bad idea. And he also stated that anything talked about at the table should be directly related to the school district instead of bringing up anything outside, just have it related to the district itself. Trustee Douglas brought up that agenda changes should have a hard stop on Monday morning. And Wise argued that being transparent builds trust and taking things away could be lack of transparency. Transparent as a brick. Others argued that meetings are counterproductive in the later hours, and Torpy directly told Trustee Wise that he dominates the mic at times, and Trustee Wise thanked Trustee Torpy for his feedback. At the 3-hour, 37-minute, 45-second mark, the music program and pep band proposal were brought up, so it is a push for earlier music exposure, and the superintendent supports pep band and studying elementary music expansion. The board in general was also very supportive of this. All right, at the 3-hour, 48-minute, 15-second mark is the consent agenda. And then resolutions began at the 3-hour, 52-minute mark. So the resolutions included personnel, fire alarm panels and boilers with a $226,000 safety upgrade, BOCE's tech contract, which is 5 years, $813,000 plus interest, reserve transfers, nursing budget shift, and boundary line changes. The board approved the boundary line adjustment tied to a Toll Brothers housing. All of this would prevent neighborhoods from being split down the middle, one side going to one district, one side going to another, ensures that all kids can attend the same schools. And it's been coordinated with Brewster Central School District, and there's a simultaneous vote. So Brewster and Carmel were voting on that both on Tuesday, and the vote passed unanimously for Carmel. I have not seen if the vote passed for Brewster or not. All right, here we are at the last hour. Old business starting at the 4-hour, 1-minute, 53-second mark. So this only included the fraternization policy. Quick recap, the fraternization policy is policy 9268. It's been a work in progress being talked about in policy committee. It was brought up at the February 10th meeting, and was asked to be immediately voted in without a second read, but there was some concerns about some of the wording brought up by Trustee Douglas. He wanted it to go back to the committee before voting on anything, and that's kind of where it was determined to be left off at the previous meeting. Trustee Wise did bring this up and motioned to revote on passing this new policy that night, on the night of the 24th. So the fraternization policy would prohibit fraternization between staff, contractors, volunteers, board members, and students. So the whole goal of this is to have a policy that prevents grooming. We already have sexual harassment policies and code of conduct and, all of these other things, but this would be specifically related to staff grooming students. So Trustee Wise did bring up that the district currently has no policy covering grooming behavior, and that legal counsel warned the district that we are at great risk without having some sort of policy. And he did reference a multi-million-dollar settlement in a nearby district, and argues that the policy can be voted on that night and then amended later. He was quoted saying, "We can always resolve it after the fact. I do not think we should let the best be the enemy of the good." There was opposition from Trustees Douglas and Vice President Curzio. Trustee Douglas argues that there are already state laws in place to protect kids, says the policy has too many pitfalls, wants to return it to committee first, and emphasizes that the process matters. Vice President Curzio confirms that the policy committee meeting is scheduled for March 2nd, this upcoming Monday, and that there is another board meeting the following week on March 10th, and agrees that Trustee Douglas has valid concerns and will not support passing the policy before the committee reviews it. At the 4-hour, 11-minute, 25-second mark, Trustee Wise can be noted disagreeing with waiting to pass the policy and argues that changes can still be made at the next committee meeting. He states that their lawyers have stated the district is at great risk by not having that policy in place, and addresses Trustee Douglas's two major concerns, that coaches should be able to text their students, and states that the superintendent can grant a waiver for that. And the second concern was that teachers in some cases have parties where students would be invited to their houses. Trustee Torpy agreed that they do need this policy, but the board agreed at the previous meeting to wait on it. Trustee Magliano agreed that the district needs something on the books now and that it can always be amended later. He argued that policies are put in place for the standards the district wants to set. Trustee Grosso is on the policy committee and stated that he thinks that this is a policy that would be constantly amended anyway, and agrees that a strict policy would infringe on mentorship opportunities for staff. However, he is also concerned that a resolution will not be reached at the next committee meeting and that the policy is needed immediately. Trustee Wise goes on to explain a letter from a student about a current staff member. So this is a former student, current staff member, but chose not to read that letter aloud. Trustee Douglas then interrupted Trustee Wise, going as far as ignoring Vice President Curzio pointing out that Wise had the floor, and states that he is concerned about hearsay. Trustee Wise disagrees that anything he would say would be hearsay and continues. Wise reads examples from the student's letter describing suggestive comments, sexual jokes, favoritism, grooming behavior, and boundary crossing. Trustee Wise can be quoted saying, "Everything I just described is legal, and we do not today have a policy preventing it." Douglas then apologizes to the student Wise was referencing and goes on to say that those teachers are terminated through a 3020A. Douglas continues to say that any educator that would do these things would not be in a classroom and that safeguards are already in place, and continues to argue that the board already determined the policy would go back to committee and amend before coming back to the board. Trustee Wise acknowledges that following that plan would mean at least 6 more weeks before students are protected. Trustee Douglas asks Trustee Wise, "Does our procedure matter that little?" Trustee Magliano interjects and states this policy isn't to block healthy relationships. It's to protect students and teachers, and that it dictates that relationships remain professional. Trustee Wise then brings up that in the last 10 years, to his knowledge, there has not been any 3020A against a teacher for misconduct, and that we are not disciplining our teachers. There is then a roll call vote at the 4-hour, 19-minute, 43-second mark. This is to immediately pass this policy before any amendments. Trustee Wise voted yes. Trustee Magliano voted yes. Trustee Grasso voted yes. Trustee Douglas voted no. Vice President Curzio voted no. Trustee Torpy voted no. The policy will be sent back to committee, and with that, Trustee Wise states our students remain unprotected. Immediately following this debate, second public comment starts at the 4-hour, 22-minute, 20-second mark. The first public commenter is a parent and asks Trustee Wise about the teacher he was referencing, asking if there was an investigation, and then asks for clarification on the previous vote. Trustee Wise responds that the policy was not adopted, and because of that, the teacher's behavior was not technically violating policy. The public commenter then urges reconsideration on the vote. The second public commenter comes up and first speaks about supporting the music and arts expansion, advocates for more library time, and advocates for honor flights, and strongly criticized the policy delay, directing a quote to Trustee Douglas, "Do our children matter that little? And your apologies mean nothing if you have no effectiveness behind that desk." The third public commenter comes up and thanked Trustee Wise for his budget questions. Again, raises the superintendent resignation timeline, stating that he apologizes for being redundant. He pushed for staff cuts, criticized the previous vote outcome, and brings up that the code of conduct policy was pushed through prior to amendments being made to it. He also noted the irony, which did get board chuckles, that the board spent 20 minutes discussing how to talk less. At the 4-hour, 34-minute, 40-second mark is board comment. Trustee Douglas cites existing sexual harassment policy language and asks the board not to be redundant in policies. Vice President Curzio states he thinks it's important board members do not question others' motives. The superintendent responds to all of this, saying that allegations would be investigated, misconduct would not be ignored, and says reporting systems do already exist, and assured the board and the public that such behaviors will not go unpunished under his administration. However, Trustee Magliano counters with that staff have historically been moved instead of disciplined, noting a staff member currently in a closet, if you know, you know, and claims the lack of documentation prevents the 3020As from proceeding. Trustee Torpy counters that that wasn't a lack of policy, it was an administration issue and them not following procedure, hence the lack of 3020As. Curzio abruptly stops the board from going on further with specifics, as they were referring to personnel issues. Trustee Wise again brings up that legal counsel has confirmed that the current policies do not address grooming behavior, and that this current policy or this upcoming policy would address that, and references the New York State SBA guidance on how grooming proceeds, and requests reconsideration in a vote, which was not granted. Trustee Douglas excuses himself at 11:10 p.m. Trustee Torpy points out that this is the time of night where meetings become unproductive. Trustee Magliano thanks maintenance for their hard work taking care of the parking lots and sidewalks, and encourages everyone to go purchase a Septo t-shirt, which I will link below. And then at the 4-hour, 45-minute, 10-second timestamp as final board remarks, they thank the facilities crews for snow removal. Reminder that the veterans tax exemption deadline is March 1st, that the New York State SBA convention is in Buffalo, October 22nd through 24th, that it was recently School Resource Officer Appreciation Day, and thanked the resource officer in the room with them. And there would be a proposal to explore tax exemption for spouses of fallen police officers. Adjournment was then at the 4-hour, 51-minute, 1-second mark. So I pride myself on being a very neutral human being and being able to see multiple sides of any equation, any perspective, and I'm having a really hard time doing that. With the last hour of this meeting, I'm very much disgusted. And I'm not going to pretend to understand how the inner workings of the Board of Education work. So I could be totally out of line and thinking of this emotionally and as a parent, and I will acknowledge that. However, having been a student in this school district and having firsthand experience of the lack of protection, I can't believe we're in 2026 arguing about the fucking logistics of a policy that could help save a young boy's or a young girl's life long term. So I reached out to Trustee Wise to clarify a few things. First, I asked if the student that he was referencing was okay and if anything had ever been done to help that person grieve and heal from what had happened to them. And I do just want to clarify that everything we spoke about, everything he clarified for me, was addressed at the board table the night of the meeting, and that nothing Trustee Wise addressed is privileged information. But I will quote the line that Trustee Wise left me with, and that is, this policy does not just protect students. It also protects the majority of our teachers who are not involved in this behavior. I also want to note that a community member informed me that another community member present at the meeting shouted, "It's giving Epstein," after the board declined to reconsider their last vote. I find it very disturbing that a board member, an adult, a teacher, was concerned about staff having parties at their homes, and that's why they would need access to these kids, I'm assuming through devices. I would really love clarification on that, but I also don't want excuses. I think that was a highly inappropriate remark to make. It's a very concerning concern to have about this policy. And I also want to say that I am very disappointed that we had 3 board members vote no on this. Again, I'm not going to pretend that I understand how you do your jobs. I don't. Obviously, I talked to a good majority of you. I understand a lot more now than I did 2.5 years ago, but I don't see how preventing voting on this behooves you. Because if anything happens between now and Monday, and then the 10th, and then what if it's not past the 10th, and anything happens to a kid, I mean, it was a over six figure lawsuit that was just settled by a neighboring district that Trustee Wise brought up. I don't think that behooves the district financially, but you're potentially hurting a student. I also want to make mention that, and this is not necessarily to do with grooming, but it does have to do with teachers in positions of power and getting away with things and being moved around. A teacher that I referenced in the first video I did, a teacher that I'm going to be referencing in the video that's coming out this Friday, was moved from building to building after devastatingly horrendous behavior towards staff and students. And there's never a 3020A. There was never a paper trail on him. And the district just settled a lawsuit because of him just this past year. Let's not play ourselves here. This district historically protects staff over students. And while I don't want to accuse of that being anyone's intention on Tuesday night, It's very much what it gives off. It's concerning that we're more worried about a few words and a policy than we are about protecting our kids. And to state that we already have this policy or this law, okay, but our kids are still being hurt in these buildings. So clearly, whatever we have on the books now may not be working. Just my 2 cents. One more disclaimer before I go. This is my podcast and my personal platform. It is not affiliated with, sponsored by, or endorsed by Carmel Central School District or any employer or volunteer of Carmel Central School District. Views on this channel are mine or those of my guests. That wraps up today's meeting recap. These decisions shape our schools, our kids, and our community, and staying informed isn't optional. If this breakdown helped you, share it with someone who wants to understand what's really happening. For full episodes, updates, and ways to connect, visit Linktree/CarmelUnfiltered. And if you have any questions, concerns, or topics you'd like covered in future recaps, message me or email me at CarmelUnfiltered@gmail.com. I'm Samantha Fulling. This is Carmel Unfiltered, my platform, my perspective. Until next time.